Our next speaker, it's a joy and a delight for me to personally invite Dr. James Lunney, Member of Parliament. We've had the privilege of course, to be with James and Helen a number of times in Israel as we've been together at the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus Jerusalem Conference. And through the years, we have such an awesome love and respect for this couple. And so, Dr. James Lunney has been here before at Westwood, but in this setting, would you please welcome to the podium Dr. James Lunney as he comes to share on why the church should support Israel.
Well, thank you, friends. It's great to be here with all of you and with Rabbi Bregman and Yoel Levin, with our Jewish brothers and sisters here, and all of us together for Israel. And of course, Pastor Julio gave me a very tough assignment to follow the inimitable Stockwell Day. However, at Stock, I know you could have gone on for an hour or two, and he's always not only full of information, but he's a very tough act for any of us to follow. Stock is one of my personal heroes. Just let me get myself fired up here. Let's try that again. Unlike Stockwell Day, sometimes I have a little challenge with my technology. There we go. And if I ever figure out how to get my timer going on my new BlackBerry, I'll be sure to be on time. I think I'll be all right. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here with you all today. I just want to say about Stock, Stock, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember it very well. Stock, of course, was the leader of the Canadian Alliance, or he was running for the leadership back in year 2000, when I had an opportunity to change directions. I had a career for 24 years as a chiropractor, but I knew a change was coming in my life, and I've been praying, which way, Lord, for about a year. And one day I got an email from a friend, one of those rare days I actually opened my emails, and it was Stock Day was speaking in Nanaimo. That was May 14th, year 2000. I remember that day. I signed in as a party member that day, and that was, by June 13th, I was accepted as a candidate for the nomination for the then Canadian Alliance, and on July the 9th, one day after Stock won the leadership, I won the nomination. There were 5 candidates. There were 700 delegates of our 1,800 members in Nanaimo, Alberni. And I only had 3 weeks to campaign. In the middle of that, I flew to Winnipeg to drive my parents across the country because it was a promise I'd made years ago. And it surprised a lot of people when a guy who hadn't had a lot of experience with politics won the nomination. But Stock Day was an inspiration then, and he was an inspiration to many of us and continues to be. He played an outstanding role as the leader of the Canadian Alliance and as a minister of the reunited Conservative Party, a great distinguished role, and he left politics with great respect of everybody in the House of Commons for the tremendous role that he played. My first trip to Israel as a member of Parliament was in 2003, and Stock was in that trip, a number of other MPs, and we had a rather memorable visit to the northern border of Israel. There was Hezbollah right across the border, the fence, what used to be called the good fence in more peaceful days. And Stock caused some angst for our IDF hosts when he asked to borrow some binoculars to look at the Hezbollah guys across the border who had taken an interest in our arrival at the border post. But tragically, this shows the beastly neighborhood that Israel lives in. There was a huge billboard on the opposite side that had a message in perfect Hebrew, and it had a decapitated head of an Israeli captain that had been captured in the hands of a Hezbollah fighter, and a message in perfect Hebrew that said, "This is your future, O Israel," in perfect Hebrew. Friends, that's the neighborhood that Israel lives in. One of the highlights of my political career was a year ago, in January 2014, to be a part of the official visit of Canada to Israel. I think, Rabbi Bregman, were you on that trip? You weren't, I'm sure. There was a lot of Jewish leaders from Canada on that trip. Stock was there in Israel with us. More than 200 people. Friends, if you had been on that plane, now first you have to see the context here. There was, of course, a lot of political people and staffers. There were Christian leaders. There were Jewish leaders. Of course, they were on their way to Jerusalem, and they're on Jerusalem time and determined to pray at certain hours. So they had their tallit and their prayer shawls, and they were determined to pray at certain hours during the night on the way to Israel because it was so many hours ahead over there. And some of the Christian leaders had never seen Jewish people at prayer, so that was interesting. There was talking going on through the night. There was security forces, RCMP. There was media on the plane. So we're all jumbled up together on the way over to Israel, and the atmosphere on the plane was celebratory. It was quite extraordinary. More than 200 people. Now, normally a visit like that, there's very strict protocol. Some of us had a luncheon with the Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman. One of his political staffers said to me that the protocol people finally just gave up. They said, whatever Canada wants, just give it to them. Prime Minister Stephen Harper gave a historic and unprecedented speech in the Knesset, affirming Israel's place among the nations, and Canada's commitment to stand with Israel in defending itself from those committed to her destruction. At the state dinner, there was an awkward moment when the Prime Minister of Israel announced next up to follow the beautiful Israeli music during the dinner would be the Prime Minister of Canada. Unannounced, unprepared. He hadn't actually bothered to inform our Prime Minister that this was coming. I wasn't sure how well it would be received. The Prime Minister went up to the grand piano there and he started to tinkle the ivories, and then he started up with a Beatles classic, Hey Jude. There were a lot of religious people in the room. I wasn't sure how well this was going to be received, but I actually saw Orthodox Jewish people standing on their chairs, trying to take pictures with their cell phones of the Prime Minister playing. You see, this was most extraordinary. But it was celebratory. And you know, friends, I feel that Canada delivered a shipload of hope to a nation that's under great duress at a time when they're under terrible pressure. Perhaps it was a little bit unorthodox, but a biblical mandate nonetheless. As Isaiah 40, verse 1, the commandment is, comfort ye, my people. And I believe Canada's stand with Israel at a time like this, when so many nations are condemning her, and when there's violence all around her borders, is an extremely important dynamic today. Friends, Israel is under tremendous pressure. It's facing enormous uncertainty. A nuclear Iran is an existential threat to Israel and also to the entire world. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's brilliant but controversial address to Congress took place on March the 3rd. It was the first day of Purim. That's the memorial of the Esther fast. Purim remembers the miraculous deliverance of the Jewish people from a life and death situation playing out in ancient Persia or Iran. As a newly independent MP, let me say this, that I'm not speaking for any political party when I say that President Obama's stunning rejection of Israel, his unilateral reversal of decades of U.S. foreign policy, his reckless embrace of Iran, still the most open and belligerent state sponsor of terrorism, in exchange for empty and unenforceable promises, has made the world an infinitely more dangerous place. He's put Israel once again in a position where its very existence is threatened, with allies of the mullahs fighting on its borders, Israel's borders, Iran rearming Hamas with weapons and money to build more tunnels and rockets. It's clear that tiny Israel can no longer be certain of America as a guarantor of its survival in a Middle East consumed by conflict and increasingly hostile, violent, and militarily sophisticated antagonists. So with world powers in decline, militant Islam spreading its campaign of destruction, including the ancient Assyrian and Chaldean Christian communities, the Coptic Christians targeted by ISIS in Libya, and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Who is raising the alarm on behalf of Christians? Just recently, the Pope, in his Easter address, called out to the world not to ignore the slaughter of Christians around the world. But I can tell you it was much earlier that I've been getting emails, and there have been voices raised from the Jewish community. And some of you may know the name Ron Lauder. He's the president of the World Jewish Congress. Ron Lauder, a distinguished gentleman, the former U.S. ambassador to Austria. He wrote a brilliant, powerful, trumpeting call in the New York Times, an editorial saying, who is crying out for the Christians that are being persecuted around the world? Friends, it's our Jewish brothers and sisters that I'm calling out, to our shame, frankly, in the West. I think perhaps the church has been too comfortable. But Christians are being persecuted and slaughtered at a rate that is unprecedented, perhaps, as the Pope himself said recently, it rivals what happened in the first century in ancient Rome. So, why should Christians stand with Israel? It's been said that the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. God made it clear through his prophets, the Nevi'im, that he would scatter Israel. He would just as surely gather and restore Israel as a people and as a nation. Just a few scriptures. Isaiah 43, verse 5. Now, this is 700 years BC, or BCE, if you will. And the scripture says, fear not, for I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east and gather thee from the west. I'll say to the north, give up, to the south, keep not back. Bring my sons from far and my daughters from the ends of the earth. A century later, speaking at the time of the destruction of the first temple and the dispersion, God makes it clear why it would happen, but just as certainly his promise to regather. Jeremiah 16, 14 to 16, repeated in 23 verses 7 and 8, about 600 years BC. Therefore, behold, the days come, says the Lord. They shall no more say, as the Lord lives, which brought up and which led the seed of the house of Israel out of the land of Egypt. But the Lord liveth, which brought up the seed of the house of Israel out of the north country, and from all the countries whither I had driven them, and they shall dwell in their own land. Ezekiel, now speaking at the same time to the exiles, circa 600 BC, chapters 36 and again in 39, he repeats the promise to regather, and he adds that he'll leave none of them in the nations of exile. That's in 39:28. He also says something interesting in there that I hadn't noted before, but he says, I will yet be inquired of you, O Israel, to do this. So he's looking for the Jewish people themselves to call upon him to help fulfill the Aliyah promise and the deliverance from their enemies. The New Testament, the Apostle Paul clearly states in his letter, Romans chapters 9 to 11, his heart for his Jewish brothers. Romans 11, verse 1, he says, has God cast away Israel? God forbid. And through to verse 25, for I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, that blindness in part is come to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. So there you have it. If anyone wants to tell you that Jesus wasn't Jewish, he was a Christian, or Jesus was a Palestinian freedom fighter, you have a very good reason to reject such notions. I want to say this as I begin to wrap up here. As Christians, our roots are with the Jewish people. Our past is with the Jewish people. Our Old Testament heroes are their heroes. David against Goliath, Daniel in the lion's den, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and I should learn their Hebrew names because those were the Babylonian names. Mishael was one of them. Rabbi, you could probably tell me the other ones. But you know, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego thrown into the burning fiery furnace. They were met by a fourth man walking in the fire. And according to King Nebuchadnezzar, the form of the fourth is like unto the Son of God. So Samson, Mordecai, our heroes are the Jewish people's heroes as well. Our God is known as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the God of Israel. Our future is with the Jewish people. Yes, we have a disagreement with the Jewish people about the Mashiach. Now, as a veteran of 20 trips to Jerusalem over 30 years, I remember the late mayor of Jerusalem, the beloved Teddy Kollek. More than 25 years, the mayor of Jerusalem. In the 80s, welcoming thousands of Christians to the Feast of Tabernacles celebrations. And Bonnie, where are you? You were probably there when Teddy Kollek was there. The ICEJ celebrations, the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem celebrations, that thousands of Christians would come up to. Teddy Kollek would say to us, so you Christians are waiting for the Messiah. We Jews are waiting for the Messiah. You know, as the mayor of Jerusalem, it's my job to welcome dignitaries to the city. So when he comes, I'm going to ask him, have you been here before? Friends, Psalm 102, 13 to 16, thou shalt arise and have mercy on Zion, for the time to favor her, yea, the set time is come. And it goes on to say, when the Lord shall build up Zion, he shall appear in his glory. We're waiting for the same things, the Jewish people, the Christian world. I want to make a short story about, share a short story about the character of Israel that's so maligned around the world. Just a short story. I was on one of my trips to Israel as an MP. I met a man at the ICEJ celebration, at the Binyane Ha'uma, the convention center, if you will, a man who was a Muslim convert to Christianity. His name is Umar Malinde. He's from Uganda. Not only was he a convert to Christianity, he became a pastor. And he was quite an effective pastor at a church of over 1,000 people. Now, Uganda, of course, is mostly a Christian and animist religion. Muslims are a minority in Uganda, but they were agitating for Sharia law. Umar Malinde had been raising the alarm about Sharia law and advocating against such a move. Christmas Eve, a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, the Islamicists, activists, the militant Islamic persons, if you will, were waiting for him. When he came out of his church on Christmas Eve, they threw acid in his face. Then when he doubled over in pain, they poured acid on his back. So where is he going to get help in Uganda and Kampala for such injuries? Their medical system's a little bit, inadequate, shall we say, compared to what we have in the West. Somebody thought maybe in India they could help him. So they took him to India, but there was nobody there who could help him. But he'd been studying Hebrew. He'd been studying with an American rabbi online about Judaism. He was trying to figure out, with his new knowledge of the New Testament, how do the Jews fit into this? Because his background as a Muslim kind of left him with a lot of questions. So he'd been studying online with an American rabbi, go figure. And finally, he contacted his American rabbi, and through a Canadian connection through CIJA, David Weinberg has a Canadian connection. He represents CIJA in Israel, and David Weinberg also represents the Shefa Hospital in Israel, and connections were made. Canada had a role to play in that. And Umar Malinde was brought to Jerusalem. The ICEJ looked after his housing and his care for his family. But the Shifa Hospital, some of the best surgeons in the world, and they had operated 7 times on his face. He's lost an eye. He wears a stocking over his face. That's the character of Israel. No charge. Israel looked after a Muslim convert to Christianity. 7 surgeries, saved his face, rebuilding his face. And, we were trying to help him find his way, since he can't stay permanently in Israel, to come to Canada. The character of Israel. And finally, as I close here, BDS, we have Rabbi Bregman is going to come up here shortly to talk about his battle right here at UBC with this despicable movement called boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. Friends, we need to support our Jewish community in this battle. I just want to say briefly, one of the MPs that joins us in Israel as part of the International Israel Allies Caucus Foundation that I've represented Canada on numerous times in Israel and other parts of the world. One of the guys that joins us is an MP from South Africa. His name's Kenneth Mashui. He's a black South African. He's a pastor. He's the head of a party in South Africa. And Kenneth Mashui, when he stands up and he says, show me anything about Israel that's apartheid, and I'll show you why it isn't. He's trying to raise up 25 young black Africans to travel the world with a message. He started an anti-BDS movement called DAISY, D-A-I-S-I, Defend, Advocate for, Invest in, and Support Israel. DAISY. So I want you to know... Israel needs to know she's not alone. Christians need to stand with Israel. Our past is together, our future's together. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your kind attention today.
Wonderful. My. Man, you may be seated.